Welcome to On the Record and to Lucy Marsh. Now, she is head honcho, or one of them, of the Family Education Trust. And you've been going for quite a few years. Well, about 30, is it? Somebody's told me.
More than that, actually, more than 50. So Family Education Trust was initially started in 1969. Actually, it was a GP called Dr. Stanley Ellison who, at the time, he wrote a letter to the Times newspaper here in England, and he was looking at the changes in society and what he felt was a negative aspect of the rise in single mothers and sort of the liberalisation of sex and the negative impact he thought that was having on society. And so he wrote a letter basically asking for the decent men and women of society to stand up and make a stand against what he saw as a pernicious ideology that was permeating society for not for the good. And so from the back of that, the men and women did stand up and formed what is now called the Family Education Trust. Initially at that point, it was called the Responsible Society, and it's gone through a couple of different names, but it's been the Family Education Trust for a few decades now. So yeah, so we've been going for quite a long time.
You're a full-time charity worker, basically.
Yes, we are a registered charity, and yeah, so we exist to basically do research that other organisations don't dare do. So we look at things like societal trends and what impact they have on families. We look at the causes and consequences of family breakdown and what effect that has on the raising of children. We look at what is the best way to help children to flourish and families to flourish, and we also look at sexual behaviour and different trends in sexual behaviour and what impact that has on families and the well-being of children in terms of the makeup of families. We don't have any political standpoint, or any religious standpoint, but we are entirely evidence-based, which makes us completely impartial because we follow the evidence.
Where do you get your evidence from?
So we do a lot of reports. So we commission reports into various different things. So one of the initial ones that we did was one of our founders, who was a lady called Valerie Richards. She did a report back in, the first version of this was back in 1984, and it was called Sex Education or Indoctrination. And she looked at all of the different groups when sex education and sexual health clinics like Marie Stopes, like Brooke, like in America Planned Parenthood, that they were all basically coming out of the woodwork and all were becoming very normalised. And she looked at all of the factors and the funders behind that, and she created, I suppose, like a network of the people behind all of this, and she called it the web, and it was all these people were all connected, and if you look back at that piece of work by her in 1984, what was then updated by our late director Norman Wells in the early 1990s, and to reflect what was going on at that point in terms of what's happening in schools. And you then look at that now, it's all connected, and you can see the trends and the powers and the overriding ideology from that, which actually at heart, when you look at it, Marie Stopes was a big fan of she was a eugenicist, so she basically wanted population control, and that was why a lot of these organisations were a big fan of the pill and handing out contraception sweet, because they didn't want the undesirables to breed. And so and actually, if you look back at what she said at the beginning of the founding of the Marie Stopes clinics, she wanted mass sterilisation because she didn't want people that they thought were not worthy of actually having children. She didn't want them reproducing. So these organisations have very dark roots. So that was like one of the things that we've looked at. We also, I suppose I could argue that we're kind of ahead of our time in a way, because I spend a lot of time going, look, we told you so, which is not what you want to see, because it's not. These are the sort of unfortunate aspects as a consequence of what's been happening over the last few decades. Norman Wells, as I said, our late director, he wrote a report in 2017 called Unprotected, and it was a review of all of the serious case reviews that had been done at that point on the grooming gangs. So he looked at a number of different ones. He looked at ones like Rochdale, Rotherham, Torbay, a few other ones, and he looked at the commonalities in what was found. And one of the big findings that came out of Norman's report was the normalisation of underage sex in children, and the fact that authorities, police, NHS, schools completely turned a blind eye to children under 16 saying that they were having sex, which basically, and you can see it in the reports, the police were saying that 12 and 13-year-old girls were making a lifestyle choice to have sex with multiple men, and much, much older men. And so they were saying that they were child prostitutes, or they were making that choice to be sexually promiscuous, when actually these were little girls that were being raped by multiple much older men. And in the main, not all of them, but most of those in those towns were from the Pakistani community. And so the police were worried about being labelled racist, so they didn't want to upset community cohesion. So a lot of these aspects that have not been looked at in other reports, we will look at them. So we've got in the pipeline at the moment that is due to be published, we've got a report that a guy called Piers Shepherd, who used to be one of our researchers, he has written a report for us, which is a critique of all of the big 5 children's charities, so like NSPCC, Barnardo's, Save the Children, Action for Children, talking about how they have moved away from their charitable mission, which was to promote traditional families, to stand up for public decency, and also to safeguard children. And so it's looking at how far they've moved away from those original objectives and the mission, and that they now seem to purely exist for promoting LGBTQ plus ideology to children, and which completely overrides any safeguarding. So we've got that one coming up. We've got another critique of relationship and sex education in schools. That's another one we've got coming up soon. And then we've also got an updated version of Unprotected, the paper from 2017. We've got that one coming out, which has been updated, and that is a big critique of Gillick, the Gillick competence case, which was brought a few decades ago, which basically that has been used wrongly, in our opinion, to normalise children being able to give consent to all kinds of things. So it started with sex, from Victoria Gillick's case, that started with a child being able to say, I want to have sex, I'm under 16, I want to have sex, I want to have contraceptives. And that has then come to the point, full circle, where Gillick is now being used to say that children as young as 11 can give informed consent to have a trial of puberty blockers, which is a drug that causes all kinds of irreversible consequences to things like their fertility, to their long-term bone health, loss of sexual function, permanent damage to their IQ, so they lose the cognitive processes. So, and how can a child as young as 11 possibly consent to that? So we do all kinds of different things that we've looked at. We've also had ones out recently that have looked at why the government shouldn't be putting mental health professionals into schools. That was last year, and we had one back in 2024 that looked at masculinity teaching in schools. That was 3 in 10 schools, and this was before the big craze that we've had over here, probably in other countries as well, on the back of that Netflix fictional drama called Adolescence, which Keir Starmer called a documentary, and that was entirely fictional, saying that boys, toxic masculinity, the manosphere, boys are a real problem. And our report found back in 2024 that 3 in 10 schools were already teaching that boys are a problem just because they're male, and that a lot of the way that schools work, they teach boys that they're a defective version of girls, and that's a consequence of this sort of genderless way of looking at children, as if to say that there are no biological differences in boys and girls, which we know is not true, and also it's actually harmful to suggest that boys and girls are exactly the same. So we I hope that we are a voice for common sense and reasoning, and we try to tell the truth when other people tell us that it's bigoted to do so, but we strive on to try to actually show people the truth, and to bring this to the attention of politicians who can hopefully make better decisions.
Yeah, you've made 2 very important mentions there. One is normalization.
Yeah.
We'll start with that one. Oh, well, it's, we are told constantly, it's perfectly normal to feel this way, to do things this way.
Yeah.
And if you look back, we're talking about 56, well, the 1960s, 1970s, it started going wrong. Now, was this from over the pond?
Um, Probably, but as I said, a lot of it was coming from very powerful individuals. So people like those who were behind the Planned Parenthood, who were trying to actually normalise contraceptive. I suppose a lot of this actually goes back to the pill, like the invention of the pill, really, which has been sold to women by radical feminists, that this is hugely liberating, that women can behave like men, that they can be sexually promiscuous and have sex for pleasure with whoever they like, as if this was a really good thing. If you have read, there's a very excellent book by a lady called Louise Perry, and she spoke at our conference a couple of years ago, and she wrote a book called The Case Against the Sexual Revolution. And she was arguing that actually the introduction of the pill and the normalization of casual sex as being brilliant has actually not done women any favors. It's actually been harmful, really. That separation of sex from procreation, like completely separated, and then the huge rise in abortions because of it, is actually, it's not doing women any favors at all, and that actually doesn't benefit men either, because evidence shows men do better when they're in a long-term relationship. All the studies show that married men are healthier, physically healthier, emotionally healthier, in a marriage when they're married to a woman and they have a family. It's better for their mental health. It's better for them physically. They don't get as much. There aren't as much cases of them dying of heart disease. They're better off financially. So men are better off being in that stable relationship. And it's somehow been sold to women that they don't need men, that they're better off without men. And there's also a huge rise at the moment in single mothers, of women choosing to actually use a sperm donor and have a baby via IVF. And in fact, NHS policy promotes that. So a single woman or two women who decide that they want to have a baby via IVF, they get access to IVF sooner than a heterosexual couple would be if they were struggling to conceive, because a single woman and two women in a relationship are automatically considered to be infertile straight away, because of course you can't have a baby without a sperm and an egg, so they get that treatment first, whereas heterosexual couples have to wait 2 years to prove that they've been trying to have a baby for 2 years before they get IVF on the NHS. So whereas they're saying, yes, women, just come and have a baby on your own, as if that's a good thing, without taking into account the fact that babies actually need both parents. They need their mothers and their fathers. And it's a very topsy-turvy world in terms of policy, that when we know the consequences and the outcomes for children raised by single parents or raised without both their parents are much worse than babies who were actually raised by their biological parents within a loving and stable marriage, do so much better under any sort of you look at all the outcomes in terms of academic achievements, how they're doing emotionally, they do much better. And so the evidence is saying one thing, which is that traditional marriage and parents being the mother and the father, that is by far the best way to help children flourish. And yet we have a government that is promoting single mothers, same-sex parents, and having a baby by any means possible. It's just it's a very, very upside-down world that's not based on any evidence.
Well, it is. And the second thing, of course, that appears, I've been handed statistics about homosexuals adopting. And have you any hard evidence to show the outcomes of this unusual relationship?
So there have some studies that have been done by various psychotherapists, not particularly recent ones. There have been some done that have shown that children have worse outcomes when raised by same-sex couples. However, as you can imagine, these professionals that did this research have been widely condemned as being homophobic for saying that, and so these reports, the research has been suppressed. However, if you take away sexuality from it and you look in terms of a safeguarding aspect and a risk aspect, because I don't know if you've been aware of this awful case recently in the UK of a baby called Preston Davy that was being fostered with the aim of being adopted by two gay men who were.
This was the case I was thinking about, and we've got a number of cases, quite
Yeah,
a few from America,
yeah,
of a very similar nature.
yeah.
And in my investigations and drilling down, I'm aware that even with the deadly AI, and it's useful on some things, there appears to be a cover-up,
Yeah,
a neutral stand.
yeah.
Now, when you look at this and see the figures that 20% of adoptions are through homosexuals.
Oh, it's actually more than that, Rodney. It's in the UK currently. Last year, it's 40% of
My
adoptions.
goodness me.
40% were to either single people or couples that identify as LGBT, and local councils and fostering agencies have got the policy is for them to promote to same-sex or couples or gay single people. That's who they're trying to get to adopt or foster, and actually we've seen quite a lot of cases where heterosexual couples, married couples who are Christian, whether that be evangelical Christian or Catholic, who have been adopting or fostering for a long time and have got good standing, have been refused the permission to foster or adopt anymore, because the local council say, you're going to indoctrinate these children and you're going to put your beliefs onto them and you're not going to teach them about LGBT. But it just makes no sense, because on the one hand they're okay for children to be indoctrinated into LGBT ideology, but they're not happy for people that are Christian or Catholic to actually be able to talk about their religious beliefs. But we talk about the Equality Act in this country in terms of these protected characteristics, and religious belief is right up there. But as in the phrase of George Orwell, that everyone is equal, but some people are more equal than others. It's certainly the case. If you're a Christian in this country, you are right down there. So
I'm going to say it's in our DEI world, frankly, if you're a straight white Christian, you're at the bottom rung, aren't you?
Especially if you're a man, especially if you're a straight white Christian working class man, you're right down there. So you're almost untouchable. It's really shocking. So it just seems crazy that basically that a very small percentage of the population, I think it's no more than around 5%, if not lower, of the population are would identify as being lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans.
Well, the last census showed it was between just under 1%.
Well, yeah,
2%.
So you look at that percentage, and then look at the adoptions and fostering. That 40% of children who are very vulnerable, that are coming from the care of the local authority, going to a population that is such a tiny proportion of the overall population. I think it's something like they're sort of 6 times more likely to actually give a child over to somebody from that community. And as in the case of Preston Davy and in other cases, it seems to be, how we were talking about that police didn't want to be accused of being racist and investigate the grooming gangs. It's DEI all over again, that social workers and police didn't want to investigate those 2 men who were paedophiles because they didn't want to be accused of being homophobic. And that's like the big no-no. It's like, you'd rather a child be abused than you would be accused of being homophobic, and that seems all wrong. It seems somehow that whenever the rainbow flag is raised, that all normal safeguarding rules don't seem to apply. It's like it's sort of like whitewashes over any cracks. And safeguarding children should be everybody's responsibility. It shouldn't matter anyone's sexuality or identity. It should be the protection of children must be paramount.
Yeah, and let's apply the litmus test, everybody. If there's an organisation, let's assume LGBT or anything like that, if they are preventing you from speaking out with another possibility to their position, you're shut down. Now, if you're shut down, prevented from speaking, that is number one. That should come out and say, well, end of. If you're stopping me giving my side of the argument, I'm sorry, you're definitely not right.
Yeah, I know. It's just absolutely outrageous state of affairs. It really shouldn't happen. We really need a change in policy here. I think the problem is that so much of the government, so many government departments, and any state-funded organisations like social workers, like the police, a lot of teachers, unfortunately, have been completely brainwashed by organisations like Stonewall to basically promote LGBT ideology, and it is an ideology above all else. And that's the problem, that these organisations have been so infiltrated.
We've got history, we've got previous. And how do we come back from the extremes that we're in now? People say it's always the lefties. Is that true?
No, it's not always the lefties, because I was actually putting something on X, Twitter, yesterday, because somebody had said that they were surprised that the Cabinet Office has basically they did a tweet talking about how much money that the UK government is spending on promoting LGBT rights globally. Something like more than £24 million is being spent a year, or just this year, on promoting LGBT rights, which around the world, which I don't really think they have any less rights than anybody else. But it was a bit like, well, hang on, we've got the NHS is like on its knees. The country is in the biggest financial black hole ever. We've got schools that are crumbling, and yet where's this spare 24 million come to do that? And then Keir Starmer was also recorded being some kind of garden party at Downing Street. And he was recorded as saying that he was so proud that this was the gayest government ever. And so obviously it's clear what their priorities are. And someone has said they were surprised about the Cabinet Office saying this. But it shouldn't be any surprise, because until 2021, all of the civil service departments were like in the top 10 of the Stonewall diversity index. So they were like Stonewall champions, like champion employers for being LGBTQ whatever inclusive. So just because they cut ties with them doesn't mean that they don't still believe all of that ideology. Of course they do, so it's so entrenched. So in terms of rowing back from there, it's going to be really difficult, because not only is that belief so deeply interwoven into the government, it's in all of the state-funded organisations. So you teaching unions, and you've got to look at the police force, and they're now doing apprenticeships. And I suppose what we really need to do is look at what these young recruits are being taught. We really could doing some freedom of information requests to look at what student teachers are being taught about this. What are they being taught that they're then bringing into schools? What are young trainee constables being taught that they're then bringing into policing on the street? So we had that awful, terrible tragedy of Henry Novak, the young man that was stabbed to death by a Sikh man that just murdered him for no reason. And when the police turned up, rather than believe Henry when he said about something like 12 times I've been stabbed, and one of the police officers said to him, I don't think you have, mate, and they automatically believed this other man because he was saying that he'd been racially abused, and they handcuffed a dying young man on the ground rather than actually investigate whether this guy was telling the truth. And so, as I said, when the worst possible crime that people think they can commit at the moment is to be homophobic. And what does that even mean anyway? That's a problem. So I think what we really need, as Dr. Stanley Ellison said in his call to arms in the letter to the Times back in 1969, we really need that call to arms as to say, can the decent men and women please stand up? Because if you talk to most people are appalled at what is going on around the world in terms of DEI and how that is really impacting on ordinary people. So we need people to start talking about it, and we need people to actually stand up and be counted and oppose it and say no to these things, because the police can't arrest everybody, and they can't cancel everybody, for having a different opinion. So I think we need to actually stand up in the UK and protect our rights for freedom of belief and freedom of speech.
I think most people perhaps would agree with that statement, but there again, the average Joe in the street, does he really care? It's football time at the moment. He's concentrating on that. And these more important things are just left. Is there a real swell of a movement in the United Kingdom for change or not?
I think there is. I mean, if you look at the recent local election results that we had back in May, there was a massive swing to reform, because people have had enough, and we've got a country that for centuries has been pretty much a two-party political environment. So we've had the Conservatives and Labour, and that's been it. And we had like the Lib Dems for a bit, didn't we? But now really reform has become a force to be reckoned with, because I think really that people are it's a protest vote, really, whether people like Nigel Farage and his policies or not. It's a protest vote against these two major ruling parties, because people are fed up, because they think that the Conservatives are no longer conservative. I mean, I do believe that I hope that change is coming, hopefully, because I think the Conservatives are realising they need to actually move back to being Conservatives, that actually saying that you're a political Conservative should mean that you're a social Conservative. It shouldn't mean that you're just Labour in a different colour. So I think people have had enough. I mean, they've certainly had enough of this current government, because the policies are not. Keir Starmer talks about supporting working people, and then is taxing everybody up to their eyeballs. Just going after normal men and women who are working. People seem to think that if you're working and you're saving and you're doing the right things and you're trying to protect your children, that the government is coming after you. And so I think people are fed up. But so I think we do need more people to actually speak out about the fact that they're really fed up about the situation.
We started talking about young ladies particularly. And underage sex at the beginning.
Yeah.
And we've got solid figures now. Is it any surprise that we've got 50% nearly of young people between 14 and 20, girls usually, that have got a mental problem, diagnosable problem?
Yeah.
Because they've just had too much underage sex.
Yeah, I mean, there is definitely, I wrote something about this recently, there is a definite link between casual sex and this sort of encouragement of this hedonistic lifestyle, that this is what the schools teach, that it doesn't matter when you have sex or who you have sex with, it just matters that you're having sex, because all sex is about pleasure. And that's what they teach, and love and commitment and marriage don't come into it in a lot of.
They teach them in schools. This.
Oh yeah, they teach them. It's just about pleasure. We've seen so much content. Parents send us stuff all the time. So I can't believe this is in my child's school. I've seen content myself from my own children's school. I've got 3 teenagers, and I've seen things from my own children's schools that is quite awful. And I'm thinking, how on earth is this okay, that this is and they're teaching them this when they're young as well, so under 16, so under the age of consent. They're teaching them not only about the biological aspect of sex, that they actually teach. It's like a how-to guide. It's like a sort of a sexual manual, which I don't think is at all appropriate for teachers to be giving to children. And then they make it very hard for parents to withdraw their children. They make it very hard for parents to request to see the materials. So this problem really got worse and worse when it was the Conservatives actually that decided that relationship health and sex education, RHSE, should become mandatory in schools. Up till then, it was up to schools to decide whether they wanted to opt in to teach this or not. So they made it mandatory, and the only part of it that parents can actually legally withdraw their child from is the lessons about sex. So it is obligatory for children to be in on the relationship lessons. And so basically you can't really avoid it, because even if they're not hearing purely about sex, a lot of the sex talk comes in not only in the talks about relationships, but it also comes into other lessons like biology and all sorts. We've seen even things that was recently in the papers about an exam board called Pearson that do a lot of GCSE and A-level exams, and their course content has just become completely queered, I suppose. So you've got exam questions in English that talks about non-binary people, and so it's like, Ziggy has, or even in maths, has 10 apples. They want to give them to their friends, so they're suddenly like these non-binary people that are in it, and it's just, the whole thing is ridiculous. And so it's very hard for parents to avoid it. And
we've just come across oral French and oral Spanish exams that are having scenarios assuming one person's a homosexual, the other's straight, and building that into learning another language. I mean, I've mentioned on many occasions the Trojan horse of LGBT. That's exactly it. But the government are going along with it.
Yeah, I know. Well, because of, like Keir Starmer said, this comes back to what Keir Starmer said, that he's really proud that this is the gayest ever government. That they've got so many people who identify as being LGB or T or whatever the plus stands for within the government. I mean, you only need to look at some of the current Labour lot. The things they come out with, and the majority of the Labour government, the Labour MPs, have voted to approve not only the conversion therapy bill. They're all saying this is brilliant. That this is what they want parents to be criminalised for trying to protect their children from being groomed into this ideology. They want parents can face up to 5 years in prison or an unlimited fine if their children decide to report them for being conversion practices. So most of the MPs voted for that. We've also got the Conservatives brought forward an amendment to try to stop the puberty blockers trial going ahead on the NHS, which is recruiting around 4,000 children, I believe, as young as 11, to basically go into this trial. And the Conservatives brought forward this movement to stop it, and that was voted down. It was voted down, so they wanted it to go ahead. And you've got quite a lot of Labour MPs talking how important it is that trans children must be affirmed, and you get even the peers in the House of Lords that. Yeah, so I suppose the answer to your question in terms of what to do to combat it, I suppose, as well as people speaking out, we need better candidates to be politicians. I think why this ideology has become so ingrained is that the left, as it were, and are much better at organising themselves, and they shout louder than we do. So they get themselves into these positions. They get themselves onto boards and voted into becoming an MPs and councillors. They get themselves as like school governors. So I suppose we need more sensible people to be willing to put themselves forward to be on a council, to be on boards, to be school governors, to get themselves into these positions of leadership. So we need people to actually be willing to actually do that and actually take actual action rather than moaning about it.
Yeah, a couple of things before we have to close.
Yeah.
One, basically, is something very simple, but I think it speaks volumes, and that is we are running short of children. We should be at 2.1, we're at 1.1 or whatever it is.
Yeah.
but it matches exactly the number of abortions in the last 30 years. We'd have no problem if we stop the abortion thing.
Absolutely. Well, it's a really very upsetting and distressing statistic, actually, that 1 in 3 pregnancies now end in abortion. So 1 in 3. And I think the problem is, we talked about school sex education, that within school sex education and in all of the sexual health clinics, abortion has been normalised as if it's a form of contraception. So we talked about the fact that so many young women are just having casual sex because that's been normalised as that's what you do. Have multiple partners, and as I said, that there is a causation and a link there between mental health issues, rising mental health issues, and this sort of just sleeping around. There is a link there, and also there is also a link that there's been studies done. There's one done in Sweden, and it followed up women who'd had an abortion in their 20s and to how their mental health was in their 40s, and more than half of them had mental health issues at 40 from an abortion that they had when they were 20. So it's taken really lightly. So schools saying, these are your choices if you get pregnant. The first one being have an abortion, and as if it doesn't matter. And children are taught that a baby is just a clump of cells. I mean, I remember when I was at secondary school in the early 1990s that we had the opportunity to be shown a video about the abortion procedure. I think it was called The Silent Scream, and it showed the D&C.
We were the first channel to get in real trouble showing that, even though we obeyed all the Ofcom rules.
I know. So anyway, obviously that was withdrawn because of outcry from the pro-abortion lobby. But it's just so politically influenced. How come the pro-abortion lobby can teach about abortion procedures and how normalised it is, and basically hand out flyers for girls to say, come and have an abortion, and yet you can't show the reality of what an abortion actually means. And it's crazy when you consider that the abortion limit in this country is 24 weeks, but yet babies can be saved from 22 weeks now with advances in technology and special care baby units. And
there's absolute proof of what is really going on in the United Kingdom.
It's quite scary.
We dug deep into that fact that we were castigated severely, even though we'd followed the right rules.
I know.
We found out they had one complaint. That shows the power of the blob. It was the blob that took us off air.
Yeah, well, it's a very powerful lobby, and as I said, this all goes back to that report that our founder Valerie Richards did in 1984. That they're all connected, like the abortion lobby, the LGBT lobby, it's all about population control and reducing the population. And if you think about it as a whole, and this is all connected with all the climate change activists as well, who have basically promoted this lie that we need less children, because it's all about depopulation, and it's a death cult, all of it. So it's like, let's make all the children sterile, let's make them all not want to have children, and then it's just it's basically about sort of annihilating the population. Really, it's quite scary when you think about it like that. And in terms of the birth rate, obviously abortion is a big part of it, but the other big part of it is that motherhood and actually the importance of actually caring for your own children, and the importance of being a mother in itself as being a job, that's been completely undermined. And this has been going on for decades now, that it's saying that that's not important, that women have got to go outside and have paid work, and if they don't, that they're somehow kind of failing themselves, failing everybody else.
You're a second-class citizen, and that's that's
absolutely. And there's no long-term thinking in it, because again, evidence shows, and there's an American a psychotherapist called Erica Komisar, who's written a really good book called Being There, and she talks about the link in terms of rising mental health issues in adolescence and lack of attachment bonding in the early years. I mean, we know, science tells us that those first 3 years of a child's life are absolutely critical. And if they don't have proper attachment bonding with their mothers, yes, their fathers as well, but primarily their mothers, and if their mother isn't there as their primary caregiver, then they then are less resilient as adolescents, and they're more prone to emotional distress. And so the government knows this, but yet is not putting anything in place to encourage mothers to be able to at least have the choice of whether they want to stay at home and care for their own children. Whereas policy now is saying to mothers, you can have all these funded childcare vouchers to put your child into full-time nursery from 9 months. 9 months. So you've got the World Health Organization recommends that you exclusively breastfeed for 6 months, and that then you should carry on breastfeeding at least until a year, if not 2. And yet the government's saying, no, send your 9-month-old baby into full-time nursery. You go back to work, and don't worry about that. And then in the childcare profession, there's been loads of safeguarding issues with children being abused, children dying because they're not looked after properly, and because it's so low paid and stressful, the turnover rate, and it's primarily young women, very young women that are looking after sometimes 8 babies. So the ratios are big, and when we think that actually, really, babies are designed is one-on-one care is what they really need, we're doing children and mothers a massive disservice by saying no, unless you go back to work, you're not doing the right thing. So I do think we need to look at what other countries like Hungary, for example, do it much better. And so rather than giving out nursery vouchers, that there's a payment that they can choose what to have. And so if that enabled, even if it was a small amount, and they slightly increased child benefit or changed the tax policy so that couples weren't penalised if one parent stays at home, then at least they've got a choice. Because if you survey mothers, I think it was Policy Exchange did some research on this, and more than 70% of mothers of young children under school age said that if it wasn't for the finances, they would gladly choose to stay at home, but they can't afford to. And so that's a really bad situation where mothers can't afford to stay at home to look after their own children. That's just what kind of country is that does that? It's just our priorities very wrong.
Very wrong. Lucy, we can't go on to conversion therapy, which we need to discuss.
Yes.
That will be program 2.
Yes.
And we will keep in touch with you about that. It's been most enlightening.
Yeah.
And I hope that people can sort of sit down and think, is it really right what we're into now? What we should be doing, indeed.
Absolutely. Well, I think we could have a whole series on this.
I know, never-ending story, regrettably.
Yes, unfortunately, yes. But it's really important that we do talk about it, because this is the problem. People don't dare talk about it, and we need to be having these conversations. And because the majority of people are actually socially conservative and feel the same way. And it's really important that we get our voices heard as well, because the more we talk about it, the more everybody else will, and then we might actually get to a situation where we can combat this.
Yes, you are not the minority, folks. They want you to believe you are.
Yes.
Lucy, it's been very enlightening. We will see you very shortly. Thank you.
Thank you.